Hi, everybody. Today I'm here with Catherine O'Driscoll. And some of you, or many of you, have probably heard of Catherine, I'm sure. But I don't know whether many of you will have met her, or at least had the chance to e-meet her, as we're going to today. Catherine's actually the author of several books, and this new book, The Tip of the Needle, as far as I know, Catherine, it's going into more detail about the vaccines and the whole vaccine industry, rather than specifically about the dogs. So I've known you for many years, and from possibly when I first got into the raw feeding movement, which was around or more than 20 years ago, you were campaigning then. So for me, I just absolutely cannot tell you how important it's been for me to watch your endeavours, if you want for a better word, and follow them and support you and be able to see the difference that you're making. And I know many canine health concern members feel the same way. And it's fantastic that you're still writing and you're still putting the knowledge out there. And you just must have so much knowledge now. If only we could do like a USB thing into your mind and sort of downgrade all the information only about vaccines, of course, and dogs, and and keep that forever. That would be so cool. So tell us a little bit about for those of you that or for those of people that are watching that may not even know about canine health concern. Tell us a little bit about what that is, how long it's been going, and how that's been for you.
Right, well, actually, interestingly, I share the journey in Tip of the Needle. I'll just show you a copy of it. There you go.
Thank you. It's a very big book.
There you go.
Bigger than what I thought it was going to be.
It's pretty big, and I had to edit it down quite severely because there's a limit to the size of a book you're advised to put out there. So yeah. So what I've done with TIP is I've included what it's been like running a campaign, and it has quite a lot of my personal life in there. Really, because I think reading dry scientific facts is just too much for most people. And I know that people like biographies and autobiographies. So I thought I'd humanize it with that journey in there, which has been quite hard, to be honest, because when I first started querying annual vaccination and researching the statement that's now accepted coming from the World Small Animal Veterinary Association, and that is vaccines are not without harm. So that attracted a lot of anger and outrage from not only the vaccine industry and vets, but also dog owners, because I was basically upsetting something people believe to be true. And that's sort of pulling the rug out from under people, and people don't like that. So it really started off when initially 2 of my young dogs died. Oliver was 4 and Prudence was 6. Ollie died of what I believe is encephalitis, which means inflammation of the brain with lesions throughout the brain and central nervous system. And Prudence died of leukemia when she was 6. And I guess I'm one of these people that my dogs are my children. I know their dogs and I honour their dogginess, but the bond there is very deep. So it rocked my world, really, and I wanted to know why. And the reason I wanted to know why is that if you know why something happens, then perhaps you can stop it happening again. So that was the beginning. And at that time, there was a vet called Steve Dean writing in Dog World. Background to that is there were a lot of dog owners back in the late 80s, early 90s asking whether their dog's illness was connected to vaccines because they sort of felt there was a link or a correlation. So Steve Dean was writing in Dog World saying we were basically insane and stupid, and if we stop vaccinating we can suffer the consequences and that sort of thing. And there was a group of us who were sharing scientific papers, essentially. This was before the internet, so it was all faxed to each other or put in the post, and we were printing off research papers and buying the NOAA compendium of data sheets, which carries all the information about veterinary drugs and vaccines and so on. So I wrote a couple of letters to Dog World, which was read by some breed clubs, and I was asked to go out and lecture about what I'd found, which at that time wasn't an awful lot, but it was enough to make me, at least, be very concerned about the fact that we were vaccinating every year, because one of the key pieces of evidence we found was that we don't need to vaccinate every year, and that was coming from Ron Schultz at Wisconsin University and his colleague Tom Phillips. They conducted duration of immunity study. I must stop here for a moment because I need some dental work doing, so I'm not speaking very well at the moment. I'm slurring my words. So.
I'm just going to switch the view for those of you that are wondering. That's better. Then we can both be. Oh, no, we need to be the other way around, really. But anyway, I don't know if the view's changed for you. Has it as well?
No, I can. Oh, I can see me now, but I could just see you when you were talking.
Oh, okay. Yeah. See us both.
Yeah, I can't see you really. I'm talking to myself here, which is most disconcerting. But anyway, so I wrote these letters. I was invited to go and talk to the Dog Club annual education day. And much to my surprise, people started booing and jeering and walking out in anger and accusing me of being irresponsible and so on, which is very strange and quite an interesting experience. But I knew it wasn't personal because I kept looking back at the science and to convince myself or to satisfy myself that what I was saying was truthful. Because the last thing I'd want to do is cause harm to dogs. That wasn't what I was trying to do. I was trying to say to people, we're over vaccinating and vaccines can cause harm and we need to stop it. My late husband, John, he had a master's degree in systems analysis and operational research. And he came up with the bright idea that we should conduct a survey free of commercial bias. In other words, we didn't want any sponsorship. We wanted to be able to produce the research without anyone telling us we couldn't say something. Most research is sponsored, usually people, the pet food industry or what have you, in order to fund the research. And we didn't want to do that. So we devised a massive questionnaire. It's 26 pages long, looking at absolutely everything that might affect health in the dog. So it incorporated what they ate, whether they swam in rivers, whether they lived near overhead power cables, how often they were vaccinated, whether they were taking veterinary drugs. Even we asked people to rate the level of stress in their home. So we were looking at all the factors that influence health and ill health. And we couldn't get people to take part. It was really difficult. And then what happened is, because we idealistically thought dog owners would fund it, we were asking dog owners to contribute £5 if they took part. in return for which they get the findings. Because if you can imagine, we needed 16,000 completed questionnaires in order to have statistical significance when you extrapolate it over the different breeds of dogs and different factors involved. And much to our surprise, we were inundated with the accusations of running a scam. Dogwell published an article about this couple working out of a post office box who were likely to run away with tens of thousands of pounds of their money. So that was a bit of a blow. A friend of mine was a newspaper journalist, and he put us in touch with Stephen Innocent, the Prince Charles's libel lawyer, and they wrote to Dogworld, and Dogworld retracted. But nevertheless, it wasn't a great start to what we were doing. So I decided to write a book to educate dog owners, to make them understand why we were asking these questions. And I started with the vaccine chapter, but that turned into a book in its own right. So that was my first book on the vaccine subject. Initially, it was called Who Killed the Darling Buds of May? And I renamed it What Vets Don't Tell You About Vaccines. And that was just went into, I don't know, a dozen or so reprints. And it became a bestseller. But having said that, I must tell you, a bestseller in the book world is officially selling more than 2,000 copies. It sold many more than that, but it was a bestseller. And that was in print for 20 odd years. It's still available as an ebook. After that, I wrote Shock to the System to bring in the other factors like diet and stress and environmental toxins and that sort of thing, which affect dogs. So at the same time, I've been running Canine Health Concern, which whose aims are to research and share the causes of health and ill health in the modern dog. I've been writing articles for the dog press, and we produced a DVD in 2008, which won the American Dog Writers Association Best DVD category. And it basically plugging away day after day, trying to stop over vaccination. Now, in the tip of the needle, the one that's just come out, I'm asking a question, and that is, in 2010, I wrote to the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, which is the UK regulator, and asked them to withdraw 1-year licenses for the core vaccines. And the reason for that is that vets were and still are vaccinating against the core diseases every year when they don't need to. And as the WSAVA says, every reaction to a vaccine that isn't needed is unacceptable. So we wrote to the VMD, and they refused to take 1-year vaccines off the market, which, in my view, facilitates over-vaccination. So my question in tip is, why? You know, why won't the regulator regulate to stop a medical procedure that isn't needed? Why? Why do you think, Caroline?
Well, so does the book cover any conclusions to why, or is it, you know, we're looking at different possible theories, I'm guessing? Or, I mean, have you had any feedback at all, or even included in it from feedback to your question that you originally asked them in 2010?
We got a letter from Steve Dean, who was the vet who was writing that column in Dog World that I initially started writing to. Turned out that Steve was not just a vet, he'd spent many years in industry. And then he was recruited to the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, the VMD, and ended up as the head of VMD. So he replied to my letter and our members' letters. The interesting thing, this is how democracy works where pharmaceuticals are concerned. So all of our hundreds of our members wrote to their MPs, which is their political representative, and asked them to look into the fact that the VMD would not take 1 year vaccines off the market. So what happens then is your MP will write to the minister who's in charge of DEFRA, which is the part of the civil service that's to do with food and farming and animals. So that you write to your MP writes to the minister writes to the VMD, which is part of DEFRA. The VMD writes a response, the minister sends that to your MP, and your MP passes it to you. So you might as well just cut out the middleman and write to the VMD.
Yeah, sounds like it.
And then I was invited to have a meeting with Oliver Letwin MP at the House of Commons via a lady called Abby, who was one of his constituents. And we sat on the terrace at the House of Commons, and Oliver Letwin told me that the government, our elected representatives and the minister cannot interfere with the decisions of the VMD. So if the VMD wants to do something, democracy has no say. As I trace it through in the book, the VMD was set up by the CEO of ICI Pharmaceuticals. It was his recommendations that they were following when the VMD was set up. Now, the VMD is the organisation that licenses veterinary medicines and vaccines. And what happens is the manufacturers present information or data to the VMD, which the VMD accepts, and a license is granted. So there's nobody doing any independent research to find out whether that information submitted to the VMD is true or not.
Okay. So do you think that it's important for people, that on the pet owner side of things, people watching that perhaps don't want to vaccinate even every 3 years, which is an option now, do you think that these people should or mention to their vet, or do you think the better thing to do is just to really understand themselves what's going on and not even raise the issue with their vet and stick to their guns, if you like? Or do you think it's more beneficial for people to mention it to their vet and say, this is why I don't want to vaccinate?
There's a big problem with vets. Now, please don't think I'm vet bashing, which is a term that's bandied about quite a lot. I'm not attacking individuals. What I'm saying is the system has a problem. And the problem with vets is they're educated in universities that are heavily funded by the veterinary pharmaceutical industry and also the pet food industry and chemical industries. And every university relies on funding in addition to government funding. That's government policy. Government wants teaching establishments to go to industry and get money to help them do what they need to do. Universities of calibre want to put out research to increase their kudos. They get that funding from the pharmaceutical industry. And what happens is if the pharmaceutical industry or the pet food industry or what have you doesn't like what the academic institution is doing, they take their money away. Mm-hmm. So they have an influence on the curriculum and on what vets are taught. So as a result of that, vets are misled by their education. Most of their training, the vast bulk of their training on the vaccine issue is that's how you lift the neck and that's what you do with the needle. And apart from telling them about anaphylaxis or anaphylactic shock, which is where a human or animal can keel over and die, having a massive allergic reaction, their education doesn't go much beyond that. On top of that, vets are asked every year to get points to prove that they're continuing their education. And those points can include industry jollies with the vaccine industry. So if they go to what Dr. Patricia Jordan, a vet in America, calls a dinner of misinformation, they get training points. They get reps calling on them, giving them research papers, which quite often are sponsored by the companies selling the product. So their education is, education actually, if you look it up in a dictionary, is defined as systematic instruction. And it depends on who's giving the instruction and what their bias is. So Ron Schultz, who's a leading light in the World Small Animal Veterinary Association Vaccine Guidelines Group, big mouthful, but he's like the world expert. He's the one that did the independent duration of immunity studies. He actually says publicly vets are not educated in vaccinology and they therefore are not in a position to advise on vaccines. That's actually quite a big thing to say. And what I find, because I've studied the science for the last 25 years, I know the science. What I find is most vets are seriously lacking in knowledge on the vaccine issue, and they say silly, silly things that have no basis whatsoever in the science. So when a pet owner goes to their vet and says, oh, I've heard that we don't need to vaccinate every year, I don't know, maybe 50% of the time the vet's hackles will go up and they'll feel threatened. And the person, actually in this wonderful book, there's a foreword by a GP, Dr. Jane Donegan, and a vet, Dr. Marty Goldstein, who wrote The Nature of Animal Healing, which was #1 New York bestseller. But Dr. Donegan explains that when she left medical school and parents came into her practice and said, I don't want to vaccinate my children, she thought they were probably sociopaths and spent time trying to convince them to not be and to protect their children. And then what happened was the government launched a massive MMR vaccine campaign. And she was a bit worried about their reasoning behind that and how they were going about it. So she took herself off to the British Library and pulled out government documents from dusty shelves and discovered that vaccines hadn't actually halted a single epidemic based on government figures. Mm-hmm. And cutting a long story short, she was hauled up in front of the General Medical Council and they tried to strike her off for telling people this. And based on her own research, garnered from government documents, she was totally exonerated. So the whole vaccine arena is one of myth and misinformation. And people who think they know what they're talking about frequently don't. So going back to your question about should pet owners talk to their vets, well, they have to, because if they want to get their pets treated, then they have to basically the vet will know if they don't vaccinate. So it is very, very difficult for pet owners. I find it difficult, and I can fight my corner because I know the science. But what I find is that unfortunately, not all but most vets are very closed to information that doesn't support their worldview. And there are lots of terms to explain that, things like cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias. And, we're all subjected to that. We all have that in us. So it's very hard to remain open. And when you think about it, vets have spent, how many years, 5 years, working their guts out to qualify, and then they go into practice, and it's not an easy job to be a vet. Vets have a very high suicide rate, and that's tragic. And I think the tragedy is that they're also taught that the complementary therapies are unscientific and unfounded, which means they are closed to anything that might be in any way better than what they've got to offer, which isn't a lot, to be honest. They're offered things like non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, steroids, vaccines, antibiotics, and those are the core tools they've got at their disposal, and all of those create side effects. So it's a really hard job, and vets also aren't trained to deal with the general public, and the general public can be pretty horrible. So compassion for vets. I'm not one of these people that wants to blame anyone. It's just a tragic situation that we're stuck in, because people believe, for example, that vaccines are harmless and that they need to be boosted frequently. Neither of those two statements are true, and it's very, very hard to get through that belief system. Yeah. And it's hard in this modern world to reach millions of people, because that's how many people you've got to talk to in order to change this deeply held belief around. But it actually goes further, Caroline. And to be honest, when I finished writing and researching Tip of the Needle, I was fairly traumatized, because I thought we could change the world. But it traces right back to government. Our governments are vaccine developers and manufacturers. They develop vaccines and sell it off to the pharma industry for commercialization. They own patents on vaccines. So in effect, we've got the regulator regulating its own products. And there's a hell of a lot of money involved. Huge, huge amounts of money involved.
Mm-hmm. So I think, oh, hang on. I'll just get rid of that. We've got 10 minutes counting down now, telling us we've only got 10 minutes, but that's okay. If that happens, we'll do it in 2 parts. So that may well happen. So I think as well, or I feel that a lot of it is the human ability to overcome fears as well, because of course the belief is that you are protecting. So there's an element of fear there. If you don't do this, something might happen, and you have been irresponsible, or you have caused something, or that kind of thing. So there's that as well. But for myself, I'm not with that, because I have read so much of your stuff and researched myself and come to the conclusion that actually I'm more scared of doing them. Having said that, of course, Fusa has had them because she came from the rescue centre in Thailand, and also she had to have them in order to travel. But I found ways to hopefully to counterbalance what had happened to her on a nutritional molecular level, but on a chemical level, by having these vaccines. But I also feel that there's a lot of work we need to do as human beings to really understand that if we make that decision, that it isn't up to anybody else to then say, actually, no, you should be doing this. It's about standing firm in what we believe. And for me, I don't really, apart from doing active things like this, I don't really, if you want the word, preach to people. If somebody says they're vaccinating their dog, I don't immediately say, oh, you shouldn't do this because of X, Y, and Z. I sort of take a deep breath in and, okay, well, I know that what I'm doing for my dog, it resonates, and it's in alignment with what resonates for me. So it's a case of, for me, standing strong, keeping that column of light in us, and being that light being that doesn't want to do these things. And I think that helps a lot, because you are then in that place where you don't feel so judged for not doing it. And
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't believe anyone has the right to dictate to anyone else what they should do. So if somebody decides they're going to vaccinate, that must be their choice. But also, if they decide not to vaccinate, it isn't clear cut. It's not as though it's a totally harmless procedure. So forcing somebody to do something that may cause harm, who's going to take the responsibility for that imposition? Not the person imposing it. It's going to be the person paying for it. They're going to sit with their dogs as they die. So it's not an easy decision. And I think, Caroline, the other thing that you well know is that you can't just leave dogs, cats, horses, children unprotected. You have to do something to support their immune systems, because viruses and bacterial infections are real. So what are you going to do? And the answer that I believe is the answer is that diet is everything. Nutrition is everything. You go straight back to Hippocrates, physician. I can't remember the quote now, it's gone out of my head, but he said that diet was the most important thing. The World Health Organization, there are numerous scientific studies which show that nutrition is more effective than a vaccine.
yes.
Vitamin A is anti-infective, zinc is anti-infective, D3, selenium, vitamin E, all of these nutrients are what are the reason why individuals do and don't get infectious diseases. It's been shown. And the other thing is sanitation. When somebody says there's been an outbreak in a kennel or in a rescue centre, well, that would be expected, because they're basically infection hotbeds. When they have outbreaks, the dogs that come down are vaccinated anyway. I mean, I heard about an outbreak of a guide dog facility where puppies and adult dogs came down with parvovirus, but they were fully vaccinated. So there's something else that protects. And I believe, not from belief, but from knowledge, that diet is everything. It has to be. Yeah. And also, sanitation. Once a facility has parvo in it, and you keep getting dogs coming in, it's very hard to get rid of that.
Yeah, actually, that's recently happened over here. I don't think it was parvo. I think it was distemper. But what about the notion or the idea that the vaccine, once a dog's had a vaccine and it sheds, would that shedding be contributing to another dog picking up the disease?
Well, in America, when they mandated rabies vaccines for dogs, they started off with MLV vaccines, modified live virus vaccines, and they had to change that to killed vaccines, because MLV vaccines, which parvo, distemper and hepatitis are all MLV. And the problem with those vaccines is they can cause the disease you're vaccinating against. And they did that with the rabies vaccine, and that's why they had to pull it from the market. So yes, vaccines can cause the disease. In the case of kennel cough, especially the up the nose one, you shove that up a dog's nose, he sneezes in the owner's face later that evening. That's Bordetella bronchoseptica, which is very similar to Bordetella pertussis, which is whooping cough in humans. And there are papers to say that dogs recently vaccinated with the B bronchoseptica vaccine do give their owners what looks like whooping cough. And the lab results fail to distinguish between B pertussis and B bronchoseptica. So in a significant, and that's the word used in the study, significant number of cases. So the other thing about the kennel cough vaccine is the data sheets say that it will cause a mild infection in the vaccinated dogs. And what that means, it's an upper respiratory tract infection. It doesn't affect the lungs. But those dogs are now sneezing. They've got a mild dose of kennel cough, and you put them in a kennel, and the chances are they can start a kennel cough outbreak in that kennel. And we have CHC members who run kennels, and they won't allow a dog that's recently had that vaccine in the kennel because they know it'll destroy their reputation.
Yeah. Well, I think that's very important to understand, especially with something like kennel cough, because it's fairly new compared to the others in terms of being compulsory. But, you know, and for people just to be doing them without considering. Now, we've only got a minute left. What I'll do is, we will start again, everyone, and we'll do part 2 of this as well. So I'm just going to end it for now, and we will be back. Definitely, 100%.